As one of the primary sources behind the infamous Steele Dossier faces criminal indictment for lying to the FBI, Axios reports that a media reckoning is looming. According to Sarah Fisher, wall-to-wall coverage of the unvetted dossier amounted to, quote, one of the most egregious journalistic errors in modern history. And legacy media isn't exactly rushing to admit to their own mistakes.
But the Washington Post appears to be leading the charge by editing and even removing some of their reporting on the document from back in 2017 and 2019. The Post executive editor said the paper could no longer stand by the accuracy of some elements of those previously published stories. But will actions like this be enough? Batya Ungar-Sargon is back with us to answer this question. She's the deputy editor at Newsweek, deputy opinion editor at Newsweek, and author of Bad News: How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy. So glad to have you back with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So does this story, the Steele dossier, the continuing revelations about how, this was all lies and a lie that many elements of the mainstream media bought into wholeheartedly and circulated, does this speak to a theme of your book, which we talked about on the show a couple weeks ago, how the media has lost the trust of the American people, and deservedly so?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I talk about in my book is that when you're online, when you're scrolling through social media and you feel that rage feeling that feels like road rage, you see somebody who has an opinion that you really can't stand. Every time you feel that feeling, someone's making $1 million, right? The media has really hacked our emotions through outrage in the same way that social media did. And they're using that same sort of feedback loop to make readers feel things very, very extremely so they'll engage with them and share them. And that's exactly what happened with the Steele dossier. A bunch of journalists saw something that they really, really wanted to be true, right? That Donald Trump could be proven to be not just the person they didn't elect, not just somebody who was, not elite in the way that they recognize, who didn't have the right values, who was a little bit offensive, somebody who offended their values. But they saw in the Steele dossier proof that he was a racist and a pervert, right? Which was exactly what journalists were looking for to confirm their biases. And instead of thinking to themselves, wait a minute, that this feels too good, right? This confirms everything I want to be true. They ran with it and tried to sell it to the American people.
And there's actually, as I'm sure Batya knows, there's a phrase for this in the media. It's called too good to check. And the Steele dossier was too good to check. And so also, as a media critic, Batya, tell me if my understanding of this is correct. I think that when people say the media, what they're actually referring to is cable news in today's environment. And so while I think that the Washington Post and the New York Times are going to do some self-reflection about this, they will assign some managing editors to go back and review past pieces and attach notes and remove lines and add some corrections. And they may even produce like an impressive 3,000 word piece on how they got it wrong that they'll submit to, for an award at the end of the year. But the media, as in cable news, I think will just barrel forward. That's my guess. What's your sense of how cable news is going to grapple with their role in this?
I agree with you. I don't think it's likely that they're going to see a reckoning because it's not likely that there will be a consumer demand for it. That's the sad thing about it, which is that, all of the mainstream liberal outlets are catering to the same, 6 or 7 million highly educated, affluent liberal elites who want this to be true and are not going to hold it against their media outlets for pushing something that wasn't true. To your point about the New York Times, I will say the New York Times was more circumspect about the Steele dossier. However, the word Trump appeared in the New York Times in 2017 97,000 times, okay? Now, maybe you're saying, okay, well, that's just, you have to cover a president. But so then why did President Obama's name only appear in the second year of his first term 37,000 times, right? The New York Times was doing something not as bad as the Steele dossier, but something very related to it, which is, cultivating high emotions in its readership and using that to drive engagement, which is the new measure for success. So I think that the business model is truly built on this to sort of lesser and smaller degrees. And so hopefully there will be a deeper reflection on what led to this beyond just this single instance.
The problem is that this just happens so often. right? I mean,
Yes.
this is just one more instance in a long line of instances of this happening. And the only people that are actually going back and pointing the finger and saying, hey, you got this wrong, like you said, there's no appetite from the viewership to hold these media entities accountable. And a lot of it is because the media entities aren't coming out. They're not saying we lied, or we didn't do our fact checking, we didn't care, we just really like this really salacious story. They're not doing that. And so there's no one saying, hey, you need to give us truthful reporting. We want honest news. We don't want all of this other stuff, rumors and just falsehoods. But the problem is that when the people who are going to call them out, the people who are going to say, look what you did, are then going to be labeled as on the other side. Oftentimes they are on the other side, but even if they're not, then they're labeled as being on the other side. And it just continues the divide. It's just this war between two sides, rather than actually somehow correcting it. So I'm curious if you think there is any way we can get back to genuine, honest reporting rather than just this constant catering to emotion.
I mean, it's such a good question. I think that so many in the media elites were terrified of being seen as carrying water for Trump, exactly as you put it. But there really is a class element here. Trump really did win the overwhelming majority of Americans without a college degree. He really represented the sort of forgotten working class. And as we saw in 2020, increasingly of all races, not just the white working class. And it was really in that way that I believe he was anathema to the liberal elites in the media. And there's a real deep irony here because, they kept pushing the narrative that Russia had interfered in the election with all of its meddling, which we know that there was a lot of social media posting coming from the Russian troll farms, but there's no evidence that people actually changed their minds based on those posts, which is what you would need to show in order to show that it had affected the outcome of the election. What we do know now, though, is that it is very likely that elements of the Steele dossier were themselves Russian disinformation planted not to change American votes, but to push the American media to fall for a fake story that confirmed all its biases. I mean, that's so ironic, right?
Yeah, I want to refer a reminder. So this was from Eric Wemple, the Washington Post media critic, a column opinion titled, this is from a year ago, August 19th, 2020. Senate report confirms flimsiness of the Steele dossier, but vindicates mainstream media. We're sorry. You're welcome.
Well, Batya, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we will have more Rising right after this.